Hello and welcome to Born Digital, how Gen Y and Gen Z are redefining today's workforce. In this episode, we'll discuss the Born Digital generation, who now account for most of the global workforce. We'll look at how they're integrating into the workplace and how to adjust your employee experience strategies to suit the needs and expectations of this new generation of employees. I'm Safi Obadilla, Field CTO at Citrix, and today I'm joined by David, Sophie, and Amy. I'll get each one of you to introduce yourselves. David, let's start with you.
Thank you for having me. My name is David Stillman, and I've been studying the generations. This is my 23rd year. That's traditionalist baby boomers, Gen X. We call them millennials, and then Gen Z, and how that impacts the workplace or the marketplace and even nonprofits.
Thanks, David. Sophie?
Hi, Sophie Wade. I'm a workforce innovation specialist and founder of Flextel Network. We look at the future of work and at the intersection with empathy. Written a book about the future of work, and it's really about helping people adapt for the changing environment and integrating empathy, because that really is the solution that we find is the most powerful.
Thanks for joining us, Sophie. And finally, Amy.
I'm Amy Hayworth, and I look after employee experience for Citrix, and I can already tell this is going to be such an exciting and fun conversation. Sophie and David and Safi, I'm really looking forward to this.
Cool, thanks, Amy. So let's get started. For the Born Digital, comprising both millennials and Gen Z, digital technology platforms are a way of life, be it with work or socialization, content consumption, and all of these being enabled by services that were scarcely imaginable over a decade ago. But this is the first group of workers to grow up in an entirely digital world. So what impact does this have on the workplace and the way that we need to think about how work gets done? With Born Digital's already forming the majority of today's workforce, the question is, do current leaders understand the needs and wants of this generation? And do they appreciate the importance of this rising class of workers to help organizations thrive? Citrix recently commissioned a study that combined global opinion research from over 1,000 business leaders and over 2,000 knowledge workers across the globe to better understand the importance of what Born Digital want from work. And we'll cover off some of the findings of this research in today's discussion. But let's get started. Firstly, before we look at the research, I wanted to get your opinion on, are you seeing a difference within the organizations that you work with around the expectations of Gen Y and Gen Z employees and those who came before? And so I'll start with you, David, on that one.
Sure. I think one of the bigger mistakes I'm seeing a lot of people make is they're grouping together millennials and Gen Z. They're a radical difference, and especially around the digital front. One of the biggest differences I find is that millennials really were digital pioneers. They were the ones fighting really hard for things like, actually Gen Xers, my generation, pioneered for a lot of technology, the internet.
Very true.
Millennials, really fighting hard and pioneering for social media. The difference I find is Gen Z are true natives. There's a big difference between a digital pioneer and a digital native. And so I find one of the first mistakes is having grouping them together and assume that, it's the same. Digital pioneers still can get really excited about technology. So when a workplace is rolling out anything from a new dashboard to a new, CRS or a sales system, anything new in the tech space, millennials still get really excited about it, and pioneers. Where Gen Z, you do not see that level of excitement. There's just a level of expectation. So a lot of the younger generation, Gen Z, sort of assumes you already have it and is not as excited. And a lot of companies will go to market like, ooh, look at all these screens in our lobby, or we now are connected with our new portal and, our genome index on this. And Gen Z is like, so what? And I think it's not going to be as much of a recruiting or even retention tool for Gen Z, who assumes it's there, where millennials can still get rather excited about the technical evolution.
No, I think that's a good point around assumption of or the expectation of technology. I definitely think, for Gen Z who have absolutely been born with it, there's an inherent expectation that, okay, that's fine. That's just how it is. Whereas I think your point around Gen X and Gen Y is they've been without a lot of the latest technologies and they still get excited over it. So I definitely think that's important for organizations to consider when they're trying to attract these types of generations. Sophie, your thoughts?
I think the relationship and intuitiveness based on how people have grown up or not grown up makes a big difference in terms of, I mean, I'm very comfortable and savvy with technology, but it's sort of an adjunct, it's additive, and I use it typically for functionality, whereas the intuitiveness that sort of millennials, have been sort of raised with, but it is incredibly natural and very much the sort of delineation between virtual and real is really not there for Gen Z. The issue becomes as we're moving into the future of work and the need that we have to really understand technology, that we really need to sort of embrace everybody's perspective, because we have very, very different ways of understanding it, of sort of imagining what the potential is. And that's where sort of having some of the older generations who have sort of experience, but they sort of look at technology in a very different way, but really including some of the younger generations, different approaches, different facility. They have much more time and sort of habits, habitual exploration and playing with it to play with sort of the different features. And we need everybody's inputs, everybody's perspectives to really understand what technology can do for the company. So people have very, very different ways of utilizing technology, but we need to bring all these together because they are very different.
And I think that's the key, though, is not making a blanket assumption that everyone wants the same things, and really understanding the diversity of needs that come from those different generations, I think, is really important. Amy, your thoughts?
Love everything that's been said so far. And, one of the things that comes to mind along the lines of the intuitiveness is I'm looking at employee experience, and that's a big, broad thing, and there's a lot of different ways to define it. But where I'm really homing in is, where are there points of friction? Where in the digital, physical, or human experience are things not as smooth, not as intuitive as they potentially could be? So as we think about the experience of any generation in the workforce, but particularly one that is digitally savvy and interweaves the use of technology seamlessly through the virtual and physical world, really understanding that they're going to notice points of friction, and those points of friction may have exponential impact on their perceptions of an organization, their engagement, their desire to stay and be committed, but also just the treasure trove, the wealth of information for them to raise a hand and say, this here is a problem. Because that expectation is higher, I think they can also help us call out where otherwise, Gen X, some of our more tenured generations might otherwise overlook it or come up with a workaround. This generation can really help us capture energy and know where to focus.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. So, when we think about one of the topics we've just sort of covered off there, which was the expectation of technology, a lot of the perceptions in the past has also been that these younger generations, have a adversity to new technology and prefer this whole notion of global nomads and digital nomads, and freelancing, and they expect salary as one of the key expectations from what they're looking for from their jobs. But what was interesting in the survey that we did, in the research that we did, was that the top three expectations from these born digital generations was actually none of those things. Technology was way down the list. It was actually job satisfaction, career security, and good work-life balance. Now, incidentally, the research and the interviews with people were actually done at the end of last year. So obviously it was during COVID, but I wanted to sort of lead off on this next question around, what do you think the born digital workforce are looking for in their roles? And perhaps, has COVID actually helped shape that? Sophie, I'll start with you there.
So to what David was saying, I think for the born digital group, which I would like also to sort of differentiate between millennials and Gen Z, I think there is certainly an assumption that the technology stack is sufficient. So that's why I believe that it wasn't that high up, because it's kind of like that it has to be.
It's a given.
It's a given that it has to be at a certain level. Otherwise, I'm not sticking around.
Yeah.
In terms of what they're looking for, the needs are the sort of how is this company going to help me grow? How is it going to help me develop? If I'm going to be contributing, then it also needs to be helping build my skills, help my career, because the thing that really sort of Gen Xers have not, for me or boomers, we haven't experienced the fact that the careers now they're not linear, continuous and compounding. They're not at one company. And so that aspect of sort of the mutually beneficial relationship that you're sort of helping my career and I'm going to be sort of helping your business really is very important. So it's really kind of like, how am I going to be supported within those organization? Because also you're not giving me any job security. You're not helping. The same trade-off that we had in the past isn't there. So if I'm going to be staying at your organization, I want to be, my skills to be developed. I want to be learning as I'm going, and that wellness aspect of it is critically important. Because of course we have seen so much, particularly with Gen Z, this they've taken the brunt of the furloughing, they've taken the brunt of the unemployment, and that has really added to the anxiety, the extraordinary anxiety that we've been seeing prior to the pandemic. And they have had, they're not necessarily looking for job security because they know it isn't there, but they're looking for income security. So where there can be a sense of that, a connection with the company and feeling that they're going to be taken care of as they're sort of going up through the organization and hopefully staying. They don't want to leave, but they want to be taken care of. Otherwise they will. Yeah,
makes sense. David, your thoughts?
I think, a lot of these things are adding up. But we're still sort of, the conversation sometimes lands in this right, wrong, better or worse, when we have to realize it's just so different. Because when you talk about this pioneering generation, and mainly Gen Z has sort of sparked it, that you then see it transcend to the other generations, is they're really challenging this notion of work-life balance, which I know was mentioned, which leads to well-being. And a lot of it is driven back to this idea of the technology, because we have a generation, again, the pioneers, Gen Z, the term that we use is they live in a phygital world where physical and digital, there's just no line. It's just been blurred. So whether I show up to the meeting and sitting here, if I'm logging on like this, I'm still at the meeting. And so for them, work is no longer a place. And the thing that they don't understand is, why is work in a time frame, 9 to 5, and then the rest is meant for your life? The younger generation is really looking at a model of work-life blend and not work-life balance. And that's where work and life are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of the very cutting-edge companies that we're working with, and they're big, they're looking at getting rid of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And it's this really performance-based culture saying, like, get your work done. If you're here, 6 to noon, and then you're gone for a while, and then you log on again, if the work's being done and you attend the meetings that you need to be at, we sort of don't have to drive that all work needs to happen during this time frame, and then you can live your life on the other. Because the challenge that you have is that it's not fair of the workplace. Because if I were to say to you, all right, I'll give you everything I got from 9 to 5, but then I'm going to go do my other job, or I'm going to go do my side hustle or my hobbies, there still are phone calls, there's still emails, there's still stuff happening after 5 o'clock. So as much as you say it, you're working after those hours, versus the companies that recognize that it's like this. Some people have side hustles. They come to work in the middle of the day, they're uploading tennis shoes to a website that they're selling to make it back to work. But the thing is, it's really part of that work-life blend. And those that are blending the worlds and not trying to balance them, I think that's going to be the key to recruitment and definitely retention of the younger generations.
Yeah, makes sense. And I definitely think that blending of work and life is the pace that they work at. They're so good at multitasking, different conversations. I mean, I look at the way my own children are communicating with their friends and trying to do their assignment and have a YouTube video playing and it's just incredible how they're able to juggle those balls. And I definitely think that same mix of this hybrid world of physical and digital, of work and life. They certainly have a talent for making it work.
And I love leaning into that a little bit, Safi, because what I see is there's a couple dynamics to make that work, right? So on one hand, we know, or we hear they're amazing at multitasking. On the other hand, we also hear digital wellness is a concern. And so really thinking about some of what brain science and neuroscience is telling us is that maybe we're not as good at it as we think we are. And maybe there is some underlying fatigue from juggling all those balls and keep it spinning. So as organizations, my belief is we don't try to undo that. We're not going to try to undo the multitasking that they've grown up just it's been part of their world. But what do we do to support them with the best possible outcome in mind for a duration? What is sustainable? How do we set up systems of awareness? What's different about our training? What kind of conversations are managers having to help them understand what sort of choice there might be in juggling all these balls? So we don't tell them it's wrong. It's not. We really risk ruining trust and also possibility and opportunity. But I also believe that those who are making decisions about training and well-being need to keep this in mind. How do we meet them where they are and help them be successful and at peak performance?
And I'd like to add to that, if I may, because I do see one challenge with there are a lot of CEOs now who are wanting to get all the younger folks back in the office, and there's that's because they need to understand, they need to look over people's shoulders and all the rest of it. I don't see that as being the big issue. For me, I see a lot of challenge. There has been challenge for years in terms of how to understand how work works, and I think this is something that, as a Gen X, I sat there, and over years I took it on, and it was actually relatively slow and sort of painful, but there wasn't, you sort of learned incrementally. Right now we have a very fast moving, it's very unpredictable, there are lots of changes, and the young people coming into the workforce, they're coming in at sort of 3 to 4 years ahead of previous generations. And it's not clear how to get the work done. And so really giving some processes and some good direction. And management, a lot of managers aren't good managers. There are a few very good managers. Otherwise, people can best be trained to actually understand, particularly people not always working in the office. If they're sort of working in a hybrid, and remote working, that people's differences in how they work best and the types of oversight and how to sort of structure and put the milestones in for the younger folks to really get some helpful support so that they can channel their efforts. Because I think I do see a lot of millennials and Gen Zs who find it a struggle because they are sort of in some ways all over the place and don't have as the sort of executive function skills that we sort of had because we were stuck in very rigid and boundaried situations. And so I think that is something that we can offer them, as you're saying, Amy, that can really be supportive of helping them do their best work wherever they're working.
Yeah,
I guess I challenge that and don't completely agree in that. That's sounding like we're borderlining on micromanagement. We're saying we got to get in.
No, I don't mean that. Not
we're
at
going to
all.
show them how we work. So you're saying show them how to work. You got to be careful because I think then you're going to squelch innovation. I think what managers don't do enough of is they don't talk about what does success look like, and then let me stand back and you show me how you want to go about it. And if I'm doing a lot of stuff at once, if I'm liking your results, I think that's a challenge. What I find is that too often, just because we don't work that way, we kind of think that they're not working the right way. And what I have found is that it actually isn't multitasking. They are not trying to do a bunch of things at one time. What they're really great at is task switching. They're just really good at doing something and boom, switching to another, where older generations need to stop, clear their head, go for a walk, go a break, and then do it, where that generation just go boom, 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 boom. So to us, it feels very scattered. But if you look, their productivity is actually better than the rest of ours, and it's measured. I just think that the goal shouldn't be to show them how to work. It's really, we have to do a better job of saying, what does success look like? You show us how you want to get it done. And I find that's when some of the best innovation happens, because we're open to them doing it that way.
Sorry, David. I think I was clumsy in how I said it. I'm talking about sort of more the framework, and you can get your task done however you choose to, but just as sort of more of how to put milestones in place wherever you find them, how to understand what are the sort of the building blocks that you can use however you want. So it's not sort of saying you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that, you have to do it like I want to do it. Absolutely not the case. So I apologize if that's how it sounded. I must be careful with that.
Well, and I think, David, you also raised an important point a bit earlier, just around the departure from that traditional 9-to-5 corporate office culture, right? And I definitely think this world of COVID and lockdown and working remotely has sort of expanded that to other generations where we've all had to do that. I wanted to sort of pose the question, because there are going to be some people in this generation who have their first entry into the workforce has been during this lockdown period. They've never actually operated or worked in an office. So how do you sort of create that office culture to help support them?
The biggest problem, the funny thing is, so I ran all of our data again after COVID, all of it, to see what changed.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest surprises that everyone had was that Gen Z was struggling with this remote workforce. And a lot of them, as you had mentioned, Safi, is just coming into the workplace.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with me being at the meeting, me operating completely fine on any of the platforms, StreamYard, like any of them, Zoom, any of them. They can just jump right in and do it. The problem is they're having a hard time finding ways to build social capital.
Yeah.
Because what happens as soon as the meetings boom, it's up. Most people my generation, you're lucky if we even turn on our videos these days.
Yeah.
And the last thing you're doing is sticking around for, what was really the proverbial water cooler, conversations that took place in the hallway or at the meeting after the meeting is really where stuff got done. And so I'm seeing a lot of leaders incentivize their managers to figure out ways to create social capital in a virtual environment. What does that mean? That means a lot of managers are saying, hey, new employee, can you stay on afterwards? Love to chat with you for a little bit, and just start talking to them, hear what they're interested in, and really incentivizing their managers, again, to figure out ways to create opportunities for social capital in the virtual environment. In the office, it happens naturally. But I think virtually is where they're really struggling. Right now, most offices, at least in a hybrid mode, have got a lot of these Gen Zers dialing in on the virtual.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I'm seeing that as well, in terms of one of the sort of cravings to be back in the office. A key craving to be back in the office, not full time, is I want to be able to connect with senior leaders. I want to be able to talk to them, to find out what other projects there might be. How can I sort of get involved? Where might my career conversations, and sort of that's the part of the connection for me at my organization, and where my future is. Like, it's the sort of part of the purpose of why I'm working so hard or doing what I'm doing. It is sort of that sort of bringing that connection in those relationships in which basically are talking towards my future.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And Sophie, you highlighted at the beginning just the importance of empathy. And that is certainly something that we're seeing and hearing at Citrix is from our new to the workforce, new to career, the desire to be seen and to be known. And, I think just across every generation as humans, that's at the core of who we are. We want to be seen and known. And this doesn't necessarily mean recognition or a raise, but just know who I am, know what I'm about, see something in me that I know is a strength. And now you see it too, and you tell me. And so I think when we start to think about what is the role of empathy, how does a manager's style change? What are some of those intentional moments of creating connection? Because, from a power position, it's still the manager has the power in a lot of ways. And I think we'll hopefully get into this a little bit more too, but with the digital aptitude, I think some of this power is at a point of shifting in a lot of ways. And I'm excited about that, because I think there's going to be some equity that generations of the past may not have had in the workplace, but with this digital aptitude, Gen Z's bringing it. And so but I do think from a managerial capability standpoint, how we actually lean into hybrid to be able to be versatile no matter which environment we're in, but creating strong, meaningful connections by taking time to truly see our team members.
And I think Sophie's really forging some important dialogue, because when it comes to empathy at work, so important, but it's really not natural for sure baby boomers. It's not as much Xers, because empathy really involves sort of, getting into your life. And, they came of age where you leave your life at the door, and then you work. And I work, I leave my life at the door. And the rest of the generations, now, life is everywhere. And what COVID did is it brought work into the home. As we all start, before this started, we said, hey, careful, my dog might walk or my kid might come home. All those things. How that's happening for baby boomers, that feels really uncomfortable. And in all of our post-COVID surveys, they felt really sort of like, oh, I shouldn't see your spouse in their pajamas going to get a snack, but yet people coming into your homes, I think what COVID has done is opened up the door for more empathy, because boomers have been forced sort of out of the workplace and into the home. And so, Sophie, I think the younger generations have been having those conversations, sort of, and you see in middle school or you see in high school now, there's more counselors. It's just more empathetic environment. But in the world of work, boomers especially did not grow up with that. So I would think those conversations are not as natural. Great. I mean, you're doing great work.
Thank you. I mean, yes, the thing is, we as human beings, we are empathetic. It's second nature. The question is, it's for people who haven't necessarily been using it in the workforce to bring it into the workforce, because they have been using it in their personal lives. So it's a sort of question of just shifting some behaviors. And yes, it does take sort of some adapting behaviors and having more of the seeing into people's worlds has, I think, exactly as you're saying, David, been very powerful. Even if it's a question of being raw and vulnerable and being a little bit uncomfortable with it, it's particularly when it is bridging those gaps to say, I as a boomer may be in this, a wonderful space that I have lots of space and I don't mind working from home. But you're actually crowded with 3 other roommates who you might have liked when you can go out for a drink with them, pre-COVID. But now, you're all fighting for the broadband bandwidth or whatever it might be. I mean, these are conversations that or the sort of the different struggles and challenges that people have been dealing with that have really, I think, helped us. I think what COVID has done is made us all feel a lot more sort of sensitized to other people's both dimensions, but also some of the emotions that we're dealing with. And I think that has helped.
But I think the other problem that you have, as real quick, is with that is, people say, we work at home. What's starting to happen is we live at work. It's suddenly, work's taking over the dining room and everywhere else. So then it's sort of like, we got to be careful too. We need more of that empathy. Just because we can work doesn't mean we always should be working.
Right.
I think that's what you're saying.
Right.
And that's where the boundaries, and I'm very interested to see what you found in the research, because that's sort of one of the things I was meaning in terms of the how to work was having boundaries. And, I know to go to work at X amount, at X period and stopping at a certain time. And while I like much more flexibility, I have a better sense of how to create more lines to give myself time off and not have the burnout that I was seeing in February and March and April was really, now we've sort of got to the summer and people seem to be doing a lot better and we're outside a lot more, but the burnout was really drastic. I saw with particularly the Gen Zs and millennials. So, I think that
it was bad before. Everyone talks about going back to work, Everyone I'm talking, no one wants to go back. And all my data shows no one wants to go back. It's not like we're living some, balanced utopia pre-pandemic.
Exactly.
The pandemic,
go back to normal. I'm like, why? What was that?
No, that's right.
I think the pandemic's given us, the smart companies that I'm working with are the ones that are saying, we're not going back. We're figuring out the new. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we've learned from the past. COVID's given us a chance to reboot. And as we forge ahead, we're creating this new world of work, but we're not going back. And those that say going back, I think it's going to really hurt recruitment. And if they do go back to the way it was, I can promise you it'll kill retention. That I can promise you.
That's right. And we're already seeing examples of that in the press of workers who are being forced to return actually quitting because they're like, no, I want that work-life balance. I think it's interesting, this conversation that we've just had around the priority around well-being and empathy is something that actually surfaced in the research as well. And we had posed a question to the people that we researched around what they would prioritize in organizations when they become a leader. So when the born digital generation become leaders, what is going to be the priority? And the number one priority, by and large, with 83%, was saying that digital wellness would be their top priority. So I think it really supports exactly what you guys are saying there.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I think the burnout that so many people suffered through COVID, and as David's saying beforehand, it wasn't that we had it right before, and we were anticipating and struggling against and resisting the future of work with all the changes that it was meaning, and now we're here, and it really does require us to be working together, be able to deal with change on a constant basis, and that is a strain on us psychologically. And so if we're going to be, and there is, less job security, less financial security. And so all of these things lead to sort of really trying to lean into employees, each employee individually. And particularly when you have younger employees who are sort of coming into the workforce for the first time, really giving them the support that they need, I think is so important. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they would focus on that. I mean, they've also seen the strain, the challenges that a lot of social media has put on their mental health as well. I mean, they know that it's not that easy.
That's right. Amy?
Yeah, so I think there's so much here, and the thing that just comes to mind is how exciting it is to hear, digital wellness being top priority, because to me, it's a very human way to look at work. It's essentially saying, let's put the human being at the center, because from that, and without that, we as organizations are unable to be successful. And to then layer on, whatever that means in terms of systems and programs and lifestyle, and I think the exciting thing to me is how perfectly fitting that those who are so digitally talented are also the ones who we can turn that back to and say, help us make this right. So don't wait until you're the CEO. The smart organizations are going to these generations now and saying, what can we do now? What would you do if you were the CEO? Or here's your $2 million, create us a program. And so making sure that we don't wait until 2035 when this born digital generation are leading companies. Let them lead us now. And I think that's where the economic benefits that were cited in the research, incredible numbers about the economic benefits of really harnessing the potential and talent of this born digital generation. If we really want to get to that, it's not about waiting. It's about leveraging that potential now.
Yeah. And I think I wanted to sort of touch a bit more on that around leadership and the role of leadership. One of the things we found in the study and other studies that we've done as well, that there is a consistent disconnect between the perception of business leaders and the actual needs of employees. So as an example, one of the points in the study was asking a question about, would born digital employees prefer to work at home full-time or at least most of the time? So basically in a hybrid approach, and 51% said that they would, but only 17% of business leaders felt that born digital would like to do that. So it's a very big disconnect between the perception of business leaders and the actual needs of born digital employees. So, obviously if there's a disconnect on that matter, there's going to be disconnects on other matters as well. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on how do you help bridge that disconnect and get leaders sort of to gain a better understanding of the needs of this type of generation. Amy, maybe we start with you there.
Yeah, I would love to talk about this, because when I saw this data, and there were a couple other pieces in there too about use of messaging apps at work, a huge born digital percentage, 81% wanted to make messaging apps just part of the workday, 21% of leaders. There are some big gaps in a couple places that were highlighted. And what came to my mind is the importance of having some sort of reverse mentorship. To me, I'm like, oh, it's time to go listen. Like, these leaders need to get out and ask some questions and go listen. So something that I practice is the 5 for 5, 5 employees, 5 questions, and just make the rounds. It's easy. And just sit back, don't defend, don't justify, don't explain, just listen, take it in. And the insights and patterns that start to develop, I think not only is this a call to leadership, is also an opportunity for Born Digital to make sure that they know they have a voice, that leaders are listening. But yeah, some of these areas would be a great starting point for anybody who's ready to listen and is in leadership. Just grab the Born Digital Effect report, find out some of these areas that there's gaps, and then go out into your own organizations and inquire, see what you can learn.
Yeah, I love the idea of reverse mentorships. I think that's a great thing there. Sophie, your thoughts?
Yes, and I've been talking for a long time about bidirectional mentoring pairs, because there's also communication about technology and the experience, and having younger generations also appreciate the experience and how those can fit together to really be a very powerful combination. I also think, it comes to empathy, which is really about listening, as Amy's saying, and really asking those questions and being clear. I mean, I have seen quite a few questions which were not set up to give the information that was really going to help people understand what younger employees wanted. Like, do you want to be working in the office, or do you want to be working from home? It's not one or the other. There are many different, there are a lot of the younger employees who've been wanting to go back to the office. Yes, they have, but not full time. So, really trying to get the sensitivity about what it is that they want and why they want it. And you sort of talking about, Dave was saying about, careers and having those connections, those social connections. Like, what is it that people want in the different settings? And so really listening to people, because I think without that, simplistic questions are not going to, that I have seen, not obviously in your survey, but that I have seen are going to cause, disconnects. And then that's going to make the problem even worse when people are making changes based on inaccurate information.
The question was really sort of your thoughts on how leaders can really address the disconnect between expectations that they see and the actual expectations of this generation.
It's sort of the same old problem I've seen for doing this for 20 plus years, is leaders are in position to make big decisions and on behalf of others. And too often they're only operating from their own generational lens. And so you take a conversation like we just had before, like everyone's really happy to see more of this focus on digital well-being. Well, I think we better understand that, like, if some seniors go create digital well-being programs, they're going to design ones that work for their generation.
Yeah.
And not for everybody else. Digital well-being is going to mean something radically different. We know this, we've studied this, to each generation. And so I think the smart people aren't saying, how is our well-being program? They're saying, what is our well-being program? Because it's going to be different things to different people. And we see it all the time with like recruiting websites. You have all these people, HR high up, trying to recruit, and they'll design a recruiting website or platform. We'll go look at it and it's doing a terrible job. We then meet the task force and there isn't one millennial or Gen Z on the task force. It's sort of like, who do you think that website recruits? It recruits your colleagues. And so it's really getting out there and asking them, like you were saying, which takes empathy, but also realizing, asking from a place of we're not trying to figure out who's right or wrong or better or worse. We need to understand how we're different. And it doesn't mean as leaders you have to it shouldn't be out with the old and in with the new. It might be, we've liked this policy. It's not going to jive with them. We'll explain why and why we're holding on to it. It's not always about catering to the new, but it is understanding where the differences are so you can speak to them and ideally bridge those gaps.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And so we've talked about the generation themselves. We've talked about leadership. I wanted to sort of shift gears a little and talk about the importance of this for business. And what are some of the business benefits of really rethinking employee experience and how you treat your employees, especially when it comes to these new generations, especially now that they make up, almost 3/4 of the workforce. Sophie, I wanted to get your thoughts, benefits for business for doing the right thing by these generations.
Well, as you're talking about, it's only going to be 2035 when you're going to have leaders who are millennials and Gen Zs. But these the cohorts of Gen Zs, for example, they're coming in, they're sort of 25, 26 now. They are the fuel. That's the engine of growth of any company. And without being able to understand who these people are, what they need, what support they need, where they want to be working, how they can do their best work, what kind of support, what kind of management. I mean, how are you going to be able to really propel your company into the future on a sustainable basis? And sustainable, I mean, in terms of being able to hire, attract, and keep those workers, and have them be engaged and contributing and able to speak up. And so culture becomes an incredibly important thing, and sort of values. They're really looking for purpose and mission and being able to connect with an organization. So without all of those things and being able to nurture those employees and help them grow within the organization, the future for companies who don't pay attention to them is not looking good.
Yeah. David?
I guess I'd be really concerned if it was a hard sell to somebody that you invest in your people and you'll see the return. I mean, it's sort of the same thing we've been hearing again and again, invest in your people and you will see the ROI. I think, again, it comes down to understanding where to make that investment, and it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, no, I agree. Amy?
With many companies having 5 generations in the workforce right now, the call to action for me is to not treat everyone the same, and to really realize that the needs and the wants, the particular situations, and we talked a little bit about a living situation as an example. And David, you just mentioned that the people making decisions need to make sure we're not making decisions for ourselves. We need to be very attuned to understanding who are our employees. And so, establishing a practice of empathy, establishing a practice of listening, establishing questioning ourselves and our assumptions, and then really looking at being inclusive, building diverse teams that represent members of our entire employee population, so that we are not only building for now, but we're also building for the future. And I do think when we unlock and say, we want to build for 5 years from now, you'll see the conversation change immensely.
Yes.
Most companies are building for right now, and that's only going to get us to tomorrow. We need to really challenge ourselves to build for much further out, and bring new voices into the mix that will not only help us see the future, but they'll be there to run the future.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point there. And I suppose we're sort of coming to the end of time. And I wanted to sort of close off with one question, talking about the future, actually. If we were to look forward 15 years to, say, 2035, and it's going to be this generation that we're talking about, Gen Z and Gen Y, who are going to be in executive and C-level positions at that point in time, what do you think the future of the workplace looks like? I mean, we've talked about a lot of things around expectations around technology, the death of the traditional 9-to-5 routine. I mean, what does the workplace look like in 15 years' time? And Sophie, I'll start with you.
I think with the increased uncertainty that is not going to go away, I do see there being overall more likelihood of there being smaller core full-time employees and many more contracted workers and freelancers that sort of will have familiar clients that they work with a lot. So I think that overall, sort of long term, there will be a much more different makeup of corporations. We're also already seeing sort of dotted edges to many corporations where people are working in that way. I think there's going to be hybrid in all kinds of situations, and a lot more flexibility. Workplace flexibility is both hybrid, but also flexibility about schedules and hours, as well as places. So I do think that that's going to be the way of the future. And I do think that investing in people is going to be what companies are going to have to do, and they're going to see the ROI on it.
Absolutely. David, your thoughts 15 years out?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Sophie was talking about, because it really is sort of how organizations will be structured. I guess I could build on that to say, so what does that mean for the employees? I think we're seeing employees that are going to have multiple careers at the same time. You know, it might be, you know, that they're going to get to, and maybe even within some organizations, I could work in marketing 2 days a week and the other 3 days a week I'm here. Yeah. I think flexibility, yeah, we're seeing some of that actually in Europe. Flexibility is going to be key. It's just going to be very flexibility and nimble, like with, I think, a smaller core group within the 1099 workforce. And then beyond that, you know, what they say is in 10 years, 65% of the entry-level jobs don't even exist yet. So I think, you know, with the evolution of hybrid, with more and more people working in digital environments, new industries, globalization, what excites me is that there's going to be a whole host of new jobs. While we see many automated and going away, many new ones coming. I guess my concern would be, I'm not sure our education system's there to create that workforce.
No,
Correct. Yeah,
that's true.
So I guess in a few years, I see college becoming a little bit more irrelevant.
Yeah, and you do see a bit of emotion around that, where they're putting more emphasis on experiences to help build yourself, your capabilities, and your knowledge. So I definitely think it's an interesting shift there. Amy, your thoughts 15 years out? I know you were talking about 5 years, but I'll take you 10 further.
Let's go further. Exactly. You know, two things. One, I'm so glad education came up. That was top of my mind. I see a much closer relationship for the pipeline of talent. So not only reformatting what happens in those years up to whatever age, we'll just say 22, to truly prepare those graduates for the world of work, whatever that might look like. But right now I see there's quite a disconnect, and bridging that, as well as potentially companies investing and growing a pipeline much earlier, a much tighter relationship between using some corporate profits to invest back in education, grow the talent, bring them in, have that pipeline ready. The other piece that I'm excited about and hopeful for is more of a focus on peak performance, flow. How do we optimize for energy over just output? And I think we have some exciting momentum there, and I hope it continues.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And so everyone, thank you for attending. And I really want to thank you, Amy, David, and Sophie, for a great discussion with a lot of lively topics that we talked about as well. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure our viewers will find it fascinating as well. Don't forget to register for the next episode of this series, where we'll be talking about sustainability in business. With that, have a good day. Thank you.